Kia ora, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Alicia Mackay Show on today, Friday, the 5th of August. It is a delight to be joining you from one Wellington, one Porirua, and one Levin this morning. I don't want to jinx anyone, but I do just want to make the point that it has been a little bit warmer this week across the board, and maybe just gently say days are getting a little bit longer. Could it be true that we're coming out of a cold, dark, terrible winter? I don't know. I don't want to anger the god of something. But anyway.
Look, when an article says some scientists think, which is what it sounds like you are, I'm loving this tweet. When an article says some scientists think, then remember this. I, a scientist, once thought I could fit a whole orange in my mouth. I could, it turns out, get it in there, but I hadn't given sufficient thought to the reverse operation. So this is a scientist who is obviously keen for experimentation. I should also, on reflection, have practiced in private. I had an audience, which was my initial satisfaction at a hypothesis well proven, slipped rapidly through stages of qualm, disquiet, then alarm, mild through severe, and ended in full-blown panic. When one
Where
panics,
are you reading this from?
I'm reading this from Twitter. And feel free to interrupt as we go along, but it's well written and a bit of a journey, so feel free to interject.
Is there more? No, it's finished now. It's finished. Oh. It's finished. Reading with Cam is finished. But that was very good, darling. And I bet you could fit an orange in your mouth. Actually, I saw a tweet this week that is mildly more serious, and obviously because I don't go on the Twitter, someone had screen capped it and posted it on a different social media, which, by the way, can I just actually, before I go any further with this conversation, Callum, get your opinion on what seems to be what is done now, which is taking screenshots of posts on social media channels and then cross-pollinating them across others as shareable content. What is the world we are living in?
Well, it's those of us who don't TikTok but get secondhand TikToks. I think we have actually created this problem where we sort of refuse to engage with a platform, but then still want to see this brilliant content that bubbles out of it. So it's now the metric of, is this post good enough to transcend the platform that it actually is on and be saved as other content? I mean, when you demanded memes on group chat the other day, a lot of mine are Twitter screenshots, and I don't know if you guys are on that platform. It's just a nice way to share it. But
no, I'm not on the Twitter, but I've just noticed that we get, someone will post a video on screen. My God, I'm so old. Post a video on TikTok and then upload that to their reels on Instagram, which then pushes to Facebook. So by the time you see it, if you're on Facebook, it's like follow the yellow brick road. And then you think, like, what am I doing with my life? And so I just want to give you props, I guess, Cam, for really transcending all of that noise and refusing to make any social media magnates any richer. And by giving us a delightful, would you listen to this, and giving us a read along, which quite frankly, I don't think we get enough of.
Well, you had enough of it. It was shut down nearly immediately. But it was interesting to see, which I'm not saying that was a bad decision, but I was going straight from the source. It was interesting seeing a reflection the other day from someone who is lamenting, once the rise of search engines and other social media platforms had taken place, the thrill of the search being taken away. And now the whole internet's the same for everybody. It's very homogenized. It used to be that you would surf the internet and click links to get through from website to website to website to get your content. Now, 4 main platforms just share and host the same stuff, and you just post screenshots from one to the other. In the early days of the net, you could go down a rabbit hole that was unique to you. You felt like you were really going on a journey to somewhere where the destination hadn't been decided, and you were seeing stuff maybe that no one else had looked at for a long, long time.
Okay, old man shouting at cloud. In my day, we didn't have any maps, and it was better. You just got where you got to, and you didn't complain about it. And, and everything took a long time, but time wasn't the same back then, so we didn't mind.
Well, we did mind. Apparently, there's been a furor on the internet this week with a well-known Kardashian Jenner or someone complaining that Instagram's imitating TikTok. So the people are not standing for it.
Yeah, this is quite a substantial revolt, actually. So one of Instagram's kind of biggest follower bases made a direct appeal to the platform to stop it kind of just turning into TikTok with promoted content shoved in people's feeds, a sense that your feed is no longer your own, and that it's been quite hijacked by, because it's not only advertising but recommendations. So you
Yeah,
Just
it's
show
the
me the people I
recommendations.
like. Show me
So
the
this
people
is-
I follow, not
this is
random
interesting.
stuff that you want to put on me. Exactly.
Oh, see, there was a snigger at the revolt, but that was a strong reaction from both of you.
Well, I'm already thinking about it because I'm like, it's interesting how we, while we think we're not, there are particular rules of the game that we don't feel like get to be crossed, and there are these very interesting, very culturally specific expectations around social media platforms. And for Instagram, for example, it's we don't want to see advertising and sponsored content blatantly. We want to see people living their lives in a way that advertises to us subtly, because that is the norm and expectation on Instagram. And it's very interesting to me that we think we get to dictate any of the rules of that game as though we had any influence on them in the first place. And I also wanted to ask Cam whether your shaking up fist at cloud friend had ever heard of algorithms, because the idea that we're all having the same internet experience could not be further from the truth. Your phone is listening to you and then serving you what it thinks you might buy.
No, but while I'm shaking my fist at the cloud, it's worth remembering that it didn't used to be like that. At one point, it didn't matter which computer you were on or which person you were. If you Googled something, you got the same result. And the danger was when that shifted and no one got told. And so you thought what you were seeing was a universal experience if you were trying to research a fact or look up a political event or something where there's going to be a bias towards what kind of news you get. And people stopped realizing that what they were getting was a curated feed designed to make them click more, not anything resembling an objective truth.
Yeah, but you did get to surf, and people don't surf enough these days.
So what's going on in the world of Potty Rua this morning, Alicia? What books are you reading? What's the vibe?
I read a really insane book this week. I swallowed it, actually. I went to the hairdresser. Thank you. I know it looks good, doesn't it? The red's finally gone. And I started reading the book there, and then I finished it when I went to bed that night. And it was the strangest book. It was called The First Bad Man. And I should be able to tell you who wrote that, because I've got Google at my fingertips, by Miranda July. And I was explaining...
You're probably getting an author that aligns with your political beliefs.
I'd say so. I tried to explain a part of the book to Charlie, my middle child, last night, and they got really sucked in at just my explanation, which is actually the sign of a great book. But essentially what I found really interesting, the piece of the book that lots of the book was really interesting, but there was a piece of this insane person's insane life that started to make sense to me, which required a bit of a sense check. So essentially they were like, well, you've got to be careful with housekeeping. You've got to have a system. You've got to put things back where they belong, because otherwise, when you hear about people falling into the pits of depression, what happens is it starts slow. It's a few dishes in the sink. It's a magazine on the coffee table. It's some laundry you haven't put on yet, and you don't feel very good, so you put it off. And before you know it, there's a few more dishes in the sink. You actually haven't had a shower for a couple of days, but that's fine. You'll get there tomorrow. And then from there, it's a fairly rapid sort of downhill slope to just, you can't see any bench space. You're lying in your bed, urinating into cups because you can't be bothered getting up, marinating in your own filth, and your carpet hasn't been seen in days. And I'm like, okay, I see where you're going with this. And so this woman, this narrator, the protagonist, she said, look, so I've developed a system, and I'm so compliant with the system now that the system actually runs the house itself. And so she talks about how when she is depressed, she shrinks into invisibility because her house runs so seamlessly for her. It's as though she isn't there. And she says, it's really small things. Like if you're going to read a book, make sure it has a place in the bookcase. But better than that, why not stand at the bookcase with your finger in the gap where the book was while you read the book, so you can put it straight back. In fact, why read books at all? She eats directly out of the pan she cooks in, which, as long as everything that is cooked in it is savoury, she also doesn't wash. So that system just takes care of itself. She says if you have to carry something from one room to another, you want to stack your tasks. You don't want to be just walking around the house putting things back. If something has to go to the bathroom and you're near the laundry and there are towels in the dryer, don't put that thing back in the bathroom. Put it on top of the dryer so that when you fold the towels, you carry the towels and the thing back to the bathroom together. And the scariest part of this whole book, where this woman was clearly struggling with some fairly serious mental health issues, was the point where I started nodding along and thinking, yeah, this makes sense. Why do we walk around moving stuff from room to room all day?
Hearing that
Or
for the
making
first
beds.
time, I really strongly identified with that. And it's that sort of, especially if you're in a new space or a space that isn't yours, and it is what some friends who once came over for dinner called the house I was living in at the time intimidatingly clean. And
When you say your friends who once came over for dinner, do you mean they only came over once?
no, they did come back. They weren't intimidated out of the whole friendship. But it is that sense of like this space is so Spartan that there's that quality of being lived in or not, and some spaces do not achieve that.
There's
covet
something that we find an issue at the Buddy Rua house is when the cleaners come. Alicia is fanatical about people taking their shoes off at the door and making sure the kitchen stays clean, because the day that the house gets clean, you want to enjoy that for as long as possible. And there's this tension between enjoying that for the house being clean and having paid for the cleaner to come along, and also perhaps sacrificing the utility or fun of the house. Alicia,
I just want an hour. Just an hour. I want 1 hour. If I could have it, I'd like an afternoon. I'm not fanatical. It's just that as Gina closes the door to leave, someone goes running with dirty shoes across the floor, throwing cornflakes in the air, going, ha, get fucked. And I just want
a sure sign that someone's not fanatical is them saying, I'm not fanatical, and exasperatedly shouting. I'm not fanatical. I just wish everyone was like me.
I just want one afternoon. I'm going to cry. I'm literally going to cry. Anyway, I did have where all this conversation started, actually, and I'd be interested, Callum, in your take on this, was me thinking about a tweet that I'd seen. And it was talking about the co-opting and the appropriation of language, cultural language in everyday society that we don't even think about, and how we just can't do it. And I was like, oh yeah, that is bad. I'm not into that. And they're like, and then there was a little list of words you couldn't say. And I was like, oh God. Oh no. I am not as woke as I thought I was. And I immediately feel terrible. And there was a couple in particular that are on that list that I have used a lot, that I've immediately drawn a line through. And now all I can hear is other people saying them. And one of them is the word tribe. You can't go around saying you've got a tribe. You can't just be a white dude with 3 friends being like, I love this tribe, because you don't get to have that word. That is a word that has taonga and meaning and history. And you can't just be like, I'd like to kill some Indigenous people, but also can I have your words?
Yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated by this topic, and it's an evolving position. We're all learning, and I think that the license to discuss the kind of philosophical rules that we want to put behind it is really important, and meaningful discussion about why these things matter and the impact of them. I mean, my example of this is as somebody who worked in social media as it was still an emerging discipline. The default word used to describe me without my consent was guru, which has a particular connotation. And I was named this in newspapers, interestingly. So when I joined the internet party, I was called social media guru in a national newspaper, and that was sort of it was a fascinating example of when words like this are just so accepted in the vernacular, that we use it in a universal journalistic publication without really thinking about it.
Well, actually, if you want to dig into that, just that particular example down one layer, Callum, I would argue that the use of that word was more intentional than you think, and it's because they were describing a space where there wasn't, that felt foreign. It's because social media was new. People didn't understand to the fullest extent how it operated, what the rules were, and so they're calling someone who did understand those things a guru is probably more intentional than even the journalists realized, because they went, here's a foreign land that I don't understand. Here's someone who knows about it.
Yeah, and there's an academic, I forget his last name, but his first name is Stuart, but he wrote about a concept known as the new exotica. And this is, it's pulling something from far away, but creating a kind of localized meaning of it. And that's what we do with a lot of these concepts. And we evoke the sense of foreignness without actually acknowledging the context from which it comes. It was really fascinating to me how much a couple of colleagues from North America bumped on the concept of kind of a spirit animal, or that is my spirit animal. And because,
Yeah, you can't say that.
Of course you can't, because that is totally appropriating a concept that of, you know, Indigenous peoples of North America. And that is because it is so far from a New Zealand cultural context. You have people who would probably not invoke Māori concepts in that way, because of the awareness and the closeness and the discussion of that sort of stuff that you have, that just haven't thought about the concept in that way, or that it is owned by somebody else.
And that's kind of the point. Like the thing, we don't think about the deeper meaning of it, because we're lacking, I say we, and I'm just going to go like New Zealand, but also not just like white European homogenous culture, particularly in places that don't have a long history. Like New Zealand's quite new for, you know, settling wise, do love a bit of colonization. Because we don't have that rich tradition and context, we're like, what's the problem? We've just picked up a word or a concept, and it is divorced from its meaning. It is divorced from what makes it important in the first place. We have sucked all of the stuff out of it, but we're like, what's your problem, mate? It's just a word. We use words all the time, which is probably why we want it so badly in the first place.
And this is just how a kind of colonial mindset works, right? You systematically oppress someone for 200 years, and then you have a new generation completely divorce yourself from the history of that oppression, and then tell people that, oh, well, everything's fair, and like, why are you causing such a big fuss, and what's your problem?
Yeah, I've never been mean to somebody else. Sorry, Cam.
I don't know if you're apologising to me. I don't know what you're apologising for there. An example that I heard recently described, which made me rethink the use of a phrase, was the rule of thumb. I learnt that the origin of that is that it's from a law which described how thick a stick could be that you would beat your partner with. So when someone says, oh, as a rule of thumb, I do this, the origin of that's pretty disgusting, really. So that's one that I've definitely tried to phase out, and obviously one that I had no idea about. Like, who knows the origin of these phrases? They just get passed down as expressions that we imitate. Yeah, rule of thumb.
Okay, so that one is gone. I think what's important about this conversation isn't that anybody is operating from a place of perfection, but that once we know better, we do better. And what I find really upsetting is watching people that have no skin in the game try to philosophize or dictate the rules and say, oh, but don't you think it's more important that you don't get to decide? Yeah, but don't you think that, no, you don't get to decide. If somebody who has a connection and is impacted by this decides that it's not okay, it's not okay. And it's not a subject that's up for debate. And so the thing I find most frustrating is when the people that hold all the power and the privilege in the first place then try to also dictate the rules of the conversation. And it's like you get to have an opinion in your own head, and you just, that's just the end of it. As soon as you know better, you do better. And this complete inability of popular culture and trolls and Facebook comments and wherever else to just believe the lived experience of people who have been marginalized, whether that is women or Indigenous people or trans people or disabled people, and try and explain to them why their own experience of being marginalized and oppressed is incorrect, and they just need the information and perspective of the person with the power to explain them out of their oppression, will never fail to astonish me, but I cannot be fucked with it anymore.
Oh, look, I don't mind if you have the opinion, but can you stop shoving it down my throat?
I just cannot. And so I'm just not going to be nice about that anymore, I don't think, because I just see it all over the place and I've had enough of it. And I was actually in a delightful place yesterday and a delightful conference that I very much enjoy, where the word tribe, by the way, is employed far too much. And it was all I could hear because I'm sensitive to it now. But of course I am, because I've used that word until now. And now I'm like, no, that one's gone. And there was like a whole conversation around humor, so-called dark humor, or controversial humor. And as you guys know, I recently walked out of a Jim Jeffries gig because I found his comedy show to be so disgustingly offensive that I refused to sit in the same room as that anymore. And just hearing a very well-intentioned but middle-aged, middle-class white dude explained to an audience that another comedian they're a fan of, who was also a middle-aged, middle-class white dude, likes to make a distinction between, the reality and a joke about it, and that we need to have perspective. And sure, it's like rape and pedophilia aren't good, but you've got to be able to distinguish that from the joke about it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, as an old dude trying to tell me that I need to shut down my feelings about rape because they've had a better idea? I don't fucking think so. The fact that he feels as though he's got the audacity to dictate the terms of that conversation was enough to turn me off. Anyway, have I ranted too much this morning? Should we move forward?
Oh, those are great rants.
Thank you. CV, I believe you have a thing.
Yeah, would you like... I'm going to give you a pick a path here. You've got two options. Would you like penis news, or would you like Russia news?
Oh, penis news. Definitely penis news.
I want both at the same time. I want penis news about Russians.
Well, look,
Russian news about penises?
We can all agree that Vladimir Putin is a bit of a dick, so there is a link here. But in penis news this morning, we have a famous sculptor called Antony Gormley, who created a sculpture called Alert, which is scheduled to be put in at the Imperial College London. Alicia, you have your hand raised.
Is that one word or two? Is it alert like danger, or alert like a little alert?
It's one word.
I love the two hats that you wear at the same time. The outrage at the audacity of someone cracking a dad joke, and the willingness to go absolutely all in on them yourself. Love it.
A little alert.
Be alert. Your country needs alerts.
So, this the sculpture is it's very abstract. It's sort of a series of blocks put onto each other, designed to be in the shape of according to the artist, a kneeling figure with sort of a knee protruding. But the way the knee in air quotes is protruding has been described by the students who have brought a motion to the University Council to prevent the statue going in, and possibly the first instance of students being arguably more mature in their approach to drawing penises on things than the faculty staff. They have tried to stop this statue going in, and their motion is really interesting. So it says that while there is inherently nothing wrong with the human form, they have said that the obvious connotation of an erect phallus in this statue that could be drawn by the general public will bring the university into general disrepute. And it's a really fascinating case to me.
And so can we just point out too that the size of the air quotes phallus is the same size as the torso of the figure. We're not talking about a small bulge here. That is a colossal appendage.
It is. And this the image, which we will link to in the show notes, because it really does have to be seen to be believed. So there is an image that the students put to the University Council sort of comparing the artist's statement of what this sculpture entails, which is a person sort of kneeling with their knee extended, and that's, they have created a mock-up image of what they believe this will be interpreted to be. Now, there's a lot of philosophy of art that you can get into here, but I think this is a fascinating case of high culture versus how that will be interpreted by a
well,
more
my favorite
mainstream
part about the
audience.
image is that the crouching man silhouette, which is trying to indicate the size of the knee and the protrusion, is included without any blurred edges. But even though it's only a silhouette of the representation which shows the appendage as a penis, they've blurred the edges of the silhouette cartoon dick for sensitivity reasons.
Yeah, and I would be fascinated. So this image is from the Guardian news article on the matter. I'd be fascinated as to whether that's the Guardian blurring that, or whether the student submission itself had that, or whether, you know, in order to protect sensitive Guardian readers, they have done that. But yeah, the whole thing is fascinating because Anthony Gormley is he won the Turner Prize a few years ago. He's an absolutely renowned sculpture artist, but also has previous form in terms of offending, shall we say, the sexual sensibilities of mainstream audiences. So another one of his works. Could I get one of you to describe for our listeners what we're seeing on the screen here?
Cam,
We're
please.
seeing as the foreground is a gravel surface, the background is a building scape face on, slightly colourful buildings, normal standard scene from that regard. In the foreground, there appear to be what look to be large, either phallic or fecal sculptures half submerged in the gravel. One of them looks to have a bit of a twist in it. Could be a Dairy Whip kind of poo that a dog sometimes drops. The one on the right, possibly slightly more phallic. Nothing too provocative. What's the artist's explanation, CV?
So this was at the Aldeburgh seaside, and the piece is called Quartet (Sleeping). But the residents raised rather large objections, saying that they believed that this particular work of art on their seaside location looked like a collection of sex toys, and again took this to the local authorities, and we're very upset by this. But
Alicia's wow of revelation there is like, oh, they're not poos, they're dildos.
I was thinking poop, silly me.
So, yeah, I mean, I love provocative public art. It's because it creates something that kind of it does provoke really interesting conversations about high versus low culture, and that's valuable. We need to talk about these things.
I have so many thoughts on this, CV. I'm like, first of all, I love how we just, the reason, I'm sorry to just get back on the feminist bandwagon today, but I'm not sorry at all. I love that we just assumed in every case that sculpture was a man, even in the one where we weren't representing it as a penis, the squatting figure was automatically a man. There was no discussion about whether or not it could be either a gender neutral or a feminine figure, and no discussion of whether that might be a low-hung, protruding pregnant belly as opposed to a completely disproportionate penis. So, you know, nice one, Guardian and popular culture on that one.
And the
but
artist.
my second, and the artist. But my next kind of question is kind of, who gives a fuck? And when did we decide that like having a penis around would bring education into disrepute, for example? So let's extend this argument out a bit further and go, okay, what if what the sculpture is actually a very large, glorious, not even hiding what it is, penis and testicles? And that the artist has created something that is commanding, that uses materials in an interesting way, that attracts attention, that's weather hardy. Let's say, for example, that's what's happened. And
I'm equally outraged that we've we've decided that it's inappropriate to show nude human bodies when everyone has one, but it is okay to show violence or disrespect or various other things.
This
I
is
think
where
it
I'm
should
going
be
with
totally
this.
fine to get about in your birthday suit, and I'm confused as to. Well, the puritanical views of the religious are probably what fed it to start with. I'm not really sure, but I love going to a festival where there might be skinny dipping in the river, and the cultural norm allows people to do that without it being freaky or something to be ashamed of, compared to the kind of aggressive, violent kind of behaviour that you get at the drug-fueled city festival. I realise I'm going off on a tangent and a rant here, but why can't you get your kid off? Everyone's naked, everyone has the appendages, and yet we're scared and we hide them away. But we're quite happy to show violence on television or depict all sorts of other things that are ghastly that not everyone has or should.
For a similar reason that the US protects gun rights, but won't allow women to access to basic reproductive health, which is that we're really afraid of anything that involves sex or sexuality, because the obvious analogy to draw here, Callum, is that we think that a man with a flaccid penis in a marble statue is a work of art, but a statue that potentially depicts an erect penis is horrific, brings us into disrepute, because sex is an activity of the low classes, not the art. I could talk about this all day.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible point, but not necessarily because of those issues, but because purportedly, so the artist said that this is a kneeling man. That the point about gender stands because it's a block structure. It could be any kind of person, despite the artist's intention. That speaks to the patriarchy as much as anything else. But there are instances where art is deliberately provocative, and that there are like giant phallic statues that are designed to be that. This is one where interpretation has kind of come into this. In 2011, around the Rugby World Cup, there was an installation in the Octagon in Dunedin that was called the Haka Peep Show. The Haka Peep Show was deliberately a commentary on the commodification of Māori and Pacifica culture, and it was a purportedly Rexona can. So it was a giant black cylindrical shape that was erected, for want of a better word, in the Octagon in Dunedin as a public art project. There were certain peepholes in this structure, and you could peer in and watch a series of sort of audio visual presentations. So there was Tama Iti and other Māori activists sort of performing haka, and this was a commentary around the commodification of sport. It was a commentary around the sort of sexualization of a lot of this stuff, and it was a really fascinating work of art. But the difference here is it was deliberately provoking that conversation, whereas this is supposedly an entirely non-graphical work of art that is very abstract. And what society has chosen to do is interpret this as being a genitalia issue.
Yeah, and if it is genitalia, as opposed to a bunch of flowers or a pig or a fence, then what does that have to do with anything? Like, all right. Look, I think we could do this one all day. Okay, yeah, and you can also say that, and yeah, bloody oath. And honestly, it does all right, doesn't it, culturally? But anyway, we have come to 8:35, and so I am going to have to wrap up, which is a damn shame, because this feels like a half-day conversation, not a half an hour one. But look, for those of you who did come along on the ride today, I would like to thank you for sitting through discussions around such interesting things as social media, what else? A general outrage, depression, penises, public art. Am I missing anything, gang? Did we covered off a bit today?
Yeah, that's
all right.
That's the bulk of it.
That's the bulk of it. All right, I'm going to stop here. Look, I would just like to throw to my in-house co-host here, and just invite Harriet to I guess send everybody off on their day. Anything you'd like to say to the listening public, Shmaz?
Bye-bye.
All right, everyone.